Julian Assange.
Help me!
Julian Assange. Julian Assange.
Free! Free! Thank you. Only one decision. There is only one decision. There is only one decision.
I agree.
Free
I
Assange?
totally support free Julian Assange.
Thank you.
Real free speech.
It is time for Julian Assange to be out of jail. It is time to let him free. It is the Ecuadorian government by Lenin Moreno who sent him out of the embassy to the jail in England. It is disgraceful. Thank you. Let's free Julian Assange.
Thank you.
I can speak freely. Can I speak freely?
You can speak freely up here.
No, he can record me. I don't care. No, seriously. The issue is some people they're asking who's Julian Assange. I mean, you know, like there's nothing that says anything here about WikiLeaks or anything. Okay, next to the picture here, put WikiLeaks recording.
You're probably right. I think he's right. A big one.
I should mind.
A big one.
Next to his picture, WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
WikiLeaks.
Okay.
It's probably right.
Founder of, small, like at an angle. Founder of WikiLeaks. You know, the same size as
Yeah.
Exactly right,
Yeah. No, what about this? You could put WikiLeaks above its 100%. And then you could have this beside it, so they could walk side by side.
And if you can make, you know, the little hourglass out of tape.
Time is running out for Julian.
With the drip.
Yes, with the drips.
And the map of the world.
Yeah.
You go against the narrative and anyway, keep up the good work, man. We're here every Friday. Good stuff, yeah. All the best.
Oh, he's got WikiLeaks on him. He's got WikiLeaks on him.
Well, yeah, right. Huh? What's that? WikiLeaks?
Who's got a read?
Free Assange! Journalism's not a crime!
A brave Australian journalist inspired the world with his courage. He stood up to the powerful and revealed the lies, corruption and crimes of big business and government. So they set out to destroy him. smears and lies abound to diminish public support. Founding father and US President John Adams said that liberty cannot be preserved without general knowledge of the people. Julian set up WikiLeaks to ensure the truth was told and the people would have the knowledge of what their governments were doing. We cannot have democracy or freedom or liberty without transparency and accountability of government. There is a court case being held in Spain against UC Global, the company which provided security for the Ecuadorian embassy where Julian stayed after receiving asylum. The case shows that the CIA spied on Julian's lawyers, including Gareth Pearce, the solicitor for Jerry and Giuseppe Conlon, who were depicted in the movie In the Name of the Father about the Guildford Four. The men were taken from their home in Belfast and unjustly incarcerated and wrongly convicted in the UK. Giuseppe died from untreated tuberculosis in prison, and Jerry was released after 15 years when the case was quashed. Another of Julian's lawyers, Australian-born Jennifer Robinson, says she has reached a settlement with the UK government over breach of her human rights after it admitted she was likely put under covert surveillance. The UK government has now admitted that its surveillance and information sharing arrangements with the US violated her rights. She said, "It raises serious questions about the information the UK and US governments have been sharing about Julian Assange's case against extradition to the US. How can anyone, anywhere, possibly think that Julian Assange can receive a fair trial or that justice or integrity has a place in this case? The whole process is flawed. Julian faces lynch law in a kangaroo court. Nothing about this case is fair. Nothing we are being told by the publishers who work with Julian seems to be correct. They are free while Julian is locked away in a high security prison. A prison which holds terrorists, murderers, and the most violent and dangerous prisoners in the UK. Julian is described as a gentle genius by his brother. He said he's funny, sensitive and goofy. He's great with kids. Nothing like the man portrayed as a villain by the press and politicians. Not the kind of man who should be locked up for the rest of his life for telling the truth. No one who reveals crimes should be destroyed. They should be heralded as a paladin. Free inmate, our mate Julian Assange.
Free Julian Assange!
Free Julian Assange!
Free Julian Assange!
Free Julian Assange!
Journalism's not a crime!
Free! Julian Assange!
Free!
Julian Assange!
Politicians! Free Julian Assange!
Only one decision.
No extradition!
There is only one decision. Thank you.
Shows the
Awesome, thank you. Good work, guys.
Come and join us! from McDonald's next Friday.
Oh, I would if I lived in Sydney, but I don't. In Adelaide. Going to work, I'll get the voice down there.
Free Julian Assange, Albanese, and do it now.
So cool.
Just last Tuesday night there was the Ithaca premiere on the ABC, and we all went to the Australian Film, Television and Radio School at Fox Studios, and there was a good turnout there for Julian. A lot of support, a lot of journalists were there as well. So yeah, it was a good turnout for him, and yeah, it's good to see that the ABC have put that Ithaca movie on the ABC as well. So just to promote what was happening with Julian and John Shipton, what he was doing for Julian as well. So yeah, it's good at the AB that there's some mainstream media getting on board with Julian. So yeah, free Julian Assange.
On 26 September 1983, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov of the Soviet Armed Forces made a judgment which is credited with saving the lives of 2 billion people. Early that morning Moscow time, Soviet nuclear detection systems indicated with a high level of reliability that intercontinental missiles had been launched from the US. It was Duty Officer Petrov's job to determine whether the alert was verifiable and to pass his findings up the chain of command. He knew that if he affirmed the warnings of the system, his superiors in the armed forces of the Soviet Union would launch nuclear strikes at the USA, making a nuclear holocaust a certainty. During the tense 5-minute deliberation, he was under enormous stress. Consoles were flashing as he held a phone in one hand and juggled an intercom in the other, trying to take in all the information at once, while an officer yelled at him to remain calm. When he made his decision, he was not certain and described his level of conviction as 50-50. Ultimately, after weighing the evidence before him, Petrov correctly determined that the warnings arose as a result of a fault in the system and reported as much to his superiors. In doing so, he averted the possible destruction of humankind. I believe there are 3 lessons we can draw from this momentous event. Lessons that are more important now than ever before, as the risk of war between nuclear powers once again intensifies. Firstly and self-evidently, in the era of nuclear-armed states, human life on Earth can indeed be extinguished at any moment. A simple miscalculation by someone less judicious than Petrov could result in Armageddon, and the prospects of that eventuality have not necessarily decreased in recent years. For example, in 2020, the US withdrew from the Treaty on Open Skies, an agreement designed to allay the fears of member states about unexpected military activity by allowing them to conduct unarmed military surveillance flights over each other's territories. The US's withdrawal precipitated the withdrawal of Russia, a country whose leaders must now rely on its comparatively less sophisticated missile detection system, increasing the likelihood of a dangerous misunderstanding. Secondly, the events of 1983 demonstrate that intense skepticism of government is not just warranted, but vital. If 250 million 20th century deaths as a result of democide weren't enough to convince the undecided of this fact, then Petrov's actions in protecting the lives of billions should surely suffice. In interviews years after the event, the Russian officer stated how his colleagues were all military men, trained to follow orders, while he alone had received a civilian education. Had anyone in the room other than Petrov been responsible for the decision on that day, he believed that the outcome would have been different. And he rightly described the failure of the system that put the fate of the world in his hands as shameful. To those who might conclude that a failure of intelligence of great magnitude could only be a Russian problem, I have an Iraqi WMD to sell you. No, this was a failure in the foresight and the strategic processes of both governments that began weeks, months, years before the alert. A failure that was rectified by a human, a man with the sensibilities of an artist. Thirdly, the truth matters. Petrov's ability to identify objective fact in the most challenging circumstances imaginable was of pivotal importance to the survival of the human species. Nearly 40 years later, as we wade through masses of information online, we find ourselves in an era of unparalleled debate over what constitutes truth, despite our lack of training in dispassionate discernment. Truth was the domain of the people that morning in Moscow, and we must never allow our governments to not deny us the opportunity to access and to practice the truth, lest our very existence be threatened by misjudgments. There is no greater proponent of the truth than Julian Assange. At an early age, he intuitively understood the risks of yielding control over information to the government and advocated for an informed public. Given the example of Mr. Petrov, Assange's observations that wars can be started by lies can be extended even further to include misjudgment or even rank incompetence on the part of the government. Assange also said that peace can be started by the truth, and Petrov's adjudication is a perfect illustration of this. So, to reiterate, it was the processes and practices of governments, and governments with distinctly different ideologies at that brought us closer to an apocalypse than the world has ever been. The two superpowers and their respective sets of allies failed in their duty to us, the citizens of the world, to ensure that the preconditions of peace were met. It was left to an individual whose civilian training made the difference to consider all the evidence, contextualize the data, and err on the side of benevolence. Consider also that Petrov was not even scheduled to work on that day in question, and only came to be in the decision-making chair as a result of a colleague's illness. That's how tenuous our grip on life became that day.
Oh, the war criminals, not the ones exposing them.
We must ensure that our governments grant us the same goodwill that Petrov showed that day. Only through the truth can we protect ourselves from annihilation, and we cannot ultimately rely on the governments to lead us towards that truth. Stanislav Petrov saw this firsthand, and Julian Assange has done more to facilitate the next Petrov than anyone else alive. Assange must be freed, and we must shield ourselves from oblivion with the truth. This is the only way we can survive. Free Julian Assange.
Welcome to the 133rd week of Julian Assange Sydney Town Hall gatherings. It is not acceptable that Julian Assange remains in a maximum security prison. It is not acceptable that neither our Prime Minister nor our media report on the arbitrary nature of this detention. It is not acceptable that public interest truth has been effectively outlawed by Julian's persecution. We must take back our sovereignty. We must begin thinking for ourselves. We must realise we need to know facts and that we can draw our own conclusions based on evidence without being prompted by fear-mongering politicians and media personalities. We must realise that we will give our corrupt hierarchical system complete control over us if we allow it to continue persecuting Julian Assange. It must always be possible for us to know the truth about governments and corporations because they can do great harm, and we must be in a position to prevent that harm. We must be informed. We must believe in ourselves. We must come together in shared knowledge of how the world truly works. The persecution of Julian Assange is doing great harm. Nobody should believe that the only way to exist is to be in lockstep with corrupt hierarchies of control. Julian's freedom and well-being are important for all of us. Uniting to free Julian Assange will change everything for the better. Julian's freedom is possible. Our unity is possible. Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! In May! Our May! Julian Assange! Human being! Free! Free! Julian Assange! Free! 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 Julian Assange!
She wants to say something on camera.
You politicians are corrupt. I've given you a lot of advice. I've told you how to make peace, but no, you just keep fighting your big boys with the kids on mentality, the mentality of a kid. Instead of throwing stones, you throw bombs.
There's some information for you. Good night.
I know Elon's got something big coming up.
We are all Assange.